In the early 1700s, in the winemaking region of Rheingau in Germany, winemakers needed written permission from the Prince Bishop of Fulda to begin the harvest. In 1775, however, the messenger carrying the grant to begin harvest was robbed along the way and was delayed. It took the messenger about 14 days to get there with the permission, and by then, the grapes had rotted on the vine. But the people who harvested and made the wine anyway gave it to the peasants. However, the peasants had the last laugh because the wines were incredibly decadent, delicious, and sweet. In 1778, on his trip through Europe, Thomas Jefferson tasted a bottle of this Spätlese, or late harvest wine, and he was so impressed that he advised friends who were in Europe to go to the Rheingau to experience the wines and bring back a case to America. So what happened? Why did the wine from these rotted grapes taste so good? The answer is one of the ways that even in modern times to make sweet wines, the topic of today's lecture. These wines are sweet without having been fortified the way we discussed in our last lecture. For today, you will need the following 4 wines. A Sauterne. You'll notice it's in a half bottle here, as many sweet wines come in half bottles, but we're going to be tasting a 750 milliliter one later on. Here we have a Tokaji. Like I said, any Pitonhos will do. We have here an ice wine, and either a Vin Santo or a Vino Passito. Sweet wines are consumed with dessert or as a dessert. Some of them taste of dried apricots drizzled with acacia honey, while others taste of pure nectar. They can be from mildly sweet to lusciously syrupy. Some of them can last for decades, and one type is rumored to last for centuries. Generally, sweet wines are made in one of 3 ways. By concentrating the sugar inside the grape, we'll discuss a few ways to do this in a later lecture. By stopping the fermentation, by fortifying the wine before fermentation has finished, like port and Madeira, or you throw in sulfur dioxide to stop the yeast, and then you run the wine through a sterile filter. Or 3, by adding sweetening agents at the end, like we saw with the PX added to the Oloroso sherry in the last lecture. We'll start with the process of concentrating the sugar inside the grape. The story I spoke of in Rheingau, the legend of the first late harvest, is one of the ways to do this. As you let the grapes hang on the vine, the grapes continue to bring on sugar and reduce acidity, but they start to lose water as well. The rot they spoke of in the legend was no ordinary rot. It was a particular type of fungus called Botrytis cinerea, or what we call noble rot, and it needs certain conditions to appear. Botrytis appears when the climate has cool, fresh morning mists, followed by a warm, dry, sunny afternoon. This is why we only see them in certain places on the planet, and why these regions specialize in the sweet nectar of the gods. However, botrytis is quite unpredictable, and you can't tell where botrytis or its more harmful cousins, gray rot and black rot, will strike. First, the noble rot forms these unappetizing-looking little brown spots. But wait, it gets worse. Then the fungus opens up the stomata in the skins, letting out water molecules, but preventing harmful microbes from coming in that would adversely affect flavor. The grapes then go into a severely dehydrated state, and before long they look like brown raisins. And if that wasn't bad enough, then they get covered with this grayish fuzz. Botrytis doesn't affect all grapes, and those they do affect aren't affected equally. Tightly bunched white grapes work best for botrytis. It's less common with red grapes, which tend to lose their pigmentation when botrytized. However, you do see it with some Amarone producers. Amarone is an Italian wine that can be made with partially dried red Corvina grapes. While I was back in Valpolicella in the Veneto region, which is a couple of hours west of Venice, and we'll talk about that in Lecture 13, but I was visiting a producer called Massi. And while I was there, I was talking to the winemaker, and the winemaker said, "Have you ever tasted botrytized grapes?" And I said, no, I've never tasted them before. So he runs out of the room, comes back with this cluster of grapes that had some grayish white fungus on it, and it obviously had been infected by botrytis. And the person that I was with, it was a brand manager, and she was like, you're not going to eat that, right? Like, yeah, I'm going to eat it because here I really want to get the full impact. For future reference, if anyone gives you a cluster of botrytized grapes, what you want to do is take one of the grapes and pop the pulp in your mouth. Otherwise, you're going to get a mouthful of fuzz. But the experience was wonderful because when I popped the pulp inside my mouth, I got this beautiful stone fruit character, which is unusual for red grapes, but it was like this apricot and peach tone. So for them, what it does, it adds layers of flavors, which we called complexity, and it adds quality to the wine. But what it also does is add glycerol, which adds a more rounded mouthfeel. You see late harvested wines all over the world. In Germany today, Spätleses generally don't include any grapes that have been affected by botrytis, so the name just indicates late harvest. In Alsace in France, the late harvest wines are called vendanges tardives and are produced in tiny quantities, but only in great vintages. However, these don't have to be infected with noble rot either. Wines made with botrytis in Alsace are called Sélection de Grand Noble, or SGN. Most regions around the world make sweet wine only under specific circumstances, but the region of Sauternes in Bordeaux is completely committed to making sweet wine. By the way, the region and the French wine is spelled with an S on the end, so don't confuse it with the wine Sauternes, no S associated with California. Sauternes is located in the Grave district along the Garonne River and next to one of its tributaries, the Ciron. In the fall, when the Ciron waters begin to flow to the Garonne, cool mists form in the mornings, and then the afternoons are dry, warm, and sunny. These are ideal conditions for noble rot to form. If it were any damper, gray rot would begin to form and destroy the grapes, so it's really quite precarious. Semillon is an indigenous grape to this area, susceptible to botrytis, and on its own is similar to Chardonnay in its weight and structure and its reduced aromatic intensity. It's also known for fruit character from lemons to nectarines and aromatics of beeswax to something like lanolin. Semillon makes up about 80% of the blend in Sauternes, but other grape varieties are permitted to be blended in, such as the white noble grape we discussed, Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc adds freshness, acidity, and aromatic lift to Sauternes, while Muscadel, another grape variety, which might also be in the blend, adds more of a floral component and finesse. The botrytized grapes are carefully harvested by hand and pressed carefully as they don't want any astringency. Then they're fermented either in stainless steel tanks or in small French oak barrels called barriques. Barrel fermentation adds vanilla and spice character to the wine and further layers of complexity. Some producers use 100% new French oak for the most intense oak flavors, while others use partially new oak. And still others use no oak at all. It's a stylistic decision. Sauternes. Let's pick up our Sauternes glass and let's look at the color. You can definitely tell this is a 2006, but you can already tell that it's a nice gold color. Now let's do our chest, chin, nose test to test its aromatic intensity. It's fairly aromatic, but I wouldn't say it's very, very aromatic. So let's stick our nose in the glass and see what we get. It's beautiful. It smells of sweet nectarines, apricots. You even get a hint of lemon in there and honeysuckle. When it gets a little bit older, it can smell more of dried fruit and marzipan. But you definitely get some of that vanilla and cream because Sauternes is matured in oak. And also, as it gets older, you get more of a nuttiness and a toastiness. Now let's take a sip. You'll notice that it's fairly full-bodied, and you definitely notice that sweetness. But notice too that the acid in it is quite balanced. And no matter how long I'm talking here, the length just keeps going on and on and on. But on the finish, it has these lingering flavors, and that's where you get some of that beeswax kind of note. And it's not a bad thing. The best pairing with Sauternes is sex. I'm kidding. I just wanted to wake you up there. The best pairing that I know of with Sauternes is stinky cheese, like a Stilton or a Roquefort. And the reason why this is because you've got the stinky cheese has the intense aromatics, but it also is very creamy on the palate. And when you match it with something that's something fairly full-bodied, but with the sweetness, it all combines together to do this beautiful dance. And the flavors just keep lasting forever. Now, the supreme balance of Sauternes allows it to last for many years. And in great vintages, they can last for decades. Look for the years 2007, 2005, 2001, 1999, 1997, 1996, and 1995. Sweet wines from the neighboring region of Barsac are allowed to call themselves Sauternes on the label, but you may see some Barsac label wines such as Chateau d'Oisiden. This region has sandier soils than the limestone-rich soils in Sauternes and can be a bit lighter in style. Because of this, they can be incredible values. Next, we go to one of my favorite wines, my favorite botrytized wines, I should say, Tokaji from northeastern Hungary. It's pronounced Tokaji, not Tokaji. These beautiful wines are from the region of Tokaji, with no I at the end, but pronounced in the same way. There is no I at the end because the I means from the region of in Hungarian. Tokaji was known as the king of wines and the wine of kings. It was a major source of income for the princes of Transylvania who ruled over Tokaji. Since the 16th century, they've been making wines using botrytized grapes. These wines were once enjoyed in the French royal court by Louis XIV and the Russian imperial court by the Austrian Habsburgs. The Tokaji region is sheltered by the Carpathian Mountains to the north. Do you remember Bram Stoker's Dracula and his castle in the Carpathian Mountains? The mountains, in combination with the rivers that run through the region, create these cool morning mists and the warm, dry, sunny afternoons. Again, perfect for developing noble rot. The grapes permitted to use for Tokaji include Furmint, which adds finesse and a high level of acidity to the wine, and Harslevelu, which, along with yellow muscat, provides aromatic lift to the ferment. The grapes are harvested by hand, and this takes quite a long time as they pick only the noble rot-infected grapes. What I found fascinating when I was there during the harvest a few years ago was that the harvesting teams were 95% women. They choose the botrytized berries called azu berries. Traditionally, these berries were foot-trodden, made into a paste, placed in hods, cup-like vessels similar to what you see bricklayers use. They were called hods. They would then be placed into the base wines to macerate. The more hods that were thrown in, the higher the sweetness level. And you can see the sweetness level indicated on the bottle. 3 petonios, 4 petonios, 5 petonios, and so forth. Here we have a 5 petonios Tokaji. This is from Diznoko. This means that traditionally it took 5 hods of paste to make the sweetness level. Today, however, they don't use the hods anymore. So petonios really reflects the ratio of botrytized berries to fresh. But this matches the sweetness levels of the traditional levels. These wines are aged first in barrels and then in bottles. Tokaji has vast underground caves that are used as wine cellars. They keep a constant temperature of about 50 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, or 10 to 12 degrees Celsius, and about 85 to 95% humidity. Sounds like the perfect environment for mold, doesn't it? Well, there is plenty of it down there, and in fact, it's a good thing. Although completely gross looking, the mold feeds off of the alcohol evaporating from the wines and allows the cellars to remain humid. Now let's taste our Tokaji. Now pick up your Sauternes and do a color comparison. the Sauternes on my left and the Tokaji on my right. You'll notice that the Tokaji is much more amber in color. And on the nose, it smells like dried apricots, drizzled with honey and a hint of orange peel. But it does have a little bit of a floral note to it and a spice characteristic as well. And as they get older, these too get more nutty. Let's taste it. The Tokaji is sweet, and when you first take it into your mouth, it attacks your taste buds with a great level of sweetness. However, there's a high level of acidity in there, and it has some VA in there, what we termed volatile acidity in our last lecture. But it's this volatile acidity that allows it, even as I'm talking now, for the sweetness to kind of dissipate and to let the flavors linger and last. So this acidity allows it to last a really long time. There's a wine from Tokaji called Essencia. This is made from the free-run juice, drained from crushed white grapes, from the potratized berries. And it's decadently sweet. Now, to give you an idea of how sweet this wine is, remember the port in last lecture? We told you that that was about 100 grams per liter residual sugar. Now, Essencia can be several times as sweet as port. The wine itself, Essencia, is 60% sugar. Now that's sweet. However, it has very low alcohol because it has too much sugar for the yeast to handle, and the fermentation just stops. It barely ferments at all and gets to about 5% alcohol, if that. It's made in extremely low quantities, not even every year. The resulting wine is lusciously sweet. Because of the intense sugar level and high acidity, it has the ability to last for many years. It's said that some of the Polish cellars of bazaars held them for 200 years, and they're still drinkable. The wines of Tokaji are wonderful. I've served these to my family, and I ask them, what do you pair with them? And they say everything. Now, if you like sweet wines, don't miss out on Tokaji. Coming back to Germany, we get to their rare sweet wines. Riesling, as we discussed in Lecture 5, is a thin-skinned variety and is easily infected by botrytis. However, Riesling has very high levels of acidity, which can make these wines very well-balanced and very long-lasting. We talked earlier about Spätlese, which means late harvested. Auslese in German means selected from the harvest. That is, specific clusters are selected. Beerenauslese means berries selected from the harvest, and Trockenbeerenauslese means dried berries selected from the harvest. These last two, the Beerenauslese and Trockenbeerenauslese, and especially the Trockenbeerenauslese, are quite expensive as they're made in such small quantities and are so labor-intensive. How intensive? The pickers go through the vineyards seeking out individual grapes that are appropriate to use for either wines. However, Trockenbeerenauslese is only made from the finest vintages, where the grapes have rotted to such a degree they've shriveled to little raisins. Now in Germany, along the Rhine River, the vineyards are on extremely steep slopes. So grazing for these grapes takes a long time and many passes. But just to give you an idea of how long it takes, a normal hand harvester can pick approximately 750 bottles worth of grapes per day. However, it takes a picker an entire day to pick the grapes for just a single bottle of Beerenauslese and 2 days for a bottle of Trockenbeerenauslese. That's why Trockenbeerenauslese is one of the world's most expensive wines. Now, if you have the pleasure of drinking one, you'll find that its aromas just jump out of the glass, with notes of white peach, hints of lemons, limes, honey, almonds, and even sultanas, or golden raisins. Older vintages definitely get that petrol aroma we talked about, and a strong undertone of minerality. On the palate, they're also lusciously sweet, with the Trockenbeer and Auslese being the sweetest. It can be about 1.5 times the sweetness of port, and in some cases as sweet as the Tokaji Essentia. You also see these designations in Austria for their sweet wines, and they generally follow the same practices. Eiswein, or ice wine, is another cool climate sweet wine you may find in Germany. And in the US, we see a bit of coming from Canada. It too is made from Riesling, although you do find other grapes as well. Here we have one from Austria that's made from Chardonnay, as well as Welsh Riesling. Eiswein is when the grapes are picked frozen solid. They're picked when the nighttime temperature reaches about 21 degrees Fahrenheit, or 6 below degrees Celsius, or even lower. Although they say the best results come when the temperature is around 18 degrees Fahrenheit, or -8 degrees Celsius. By law in Canada, the temperature must be 17 degrees Fahrenheit, and in Germany, 19 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I hate the cold, so I can't imagine how miserable it is picking outside at this type of temperature. This doesn't generally happen until about January for Germany, and the wine will carry the vintage from the previous year, even though it's picked in January. Because it's January and the grapes have been there for a long time, it's hard to prevent hungry thieves, such as birds and, believe it or not, wild boar, from coming in and eating them. Wild boar is actually a huge problem throughout Europe, and it's another reason for low quantities of ice wine. While I was in Portugal with some other MWs and candidates, a friend of mine went for an early morning stroll, and as she did so, she heard loud Britney Spears music blaring in the vineyards. So she asked what the early disco was for when she came back, and they told her it was to scare away the wild boar, to prevent them from eating the grapes. And I guess wild boar don't really like American pop music. But they warned her that the boar can be extremely dangerous, and they've been known to seriously injure or even kill people. Most producers in Germany produce ice wine with no botrytis on the berries, but this is not required by law. In Canada, most ice wines are made with a thick-skinned hybrid called Vidal that does extremely well in the cold winters in Canada. That country now produces more ice wine than Germany does ice wine. Once the grapes are harvested, they're immediately pressed, and the water, which is actually ice at this time, is taken out. This leaves the highly concentrated sugar and acid, which is this sweet nectar, to ferment. Now let's taste this ice wine that we have here from Austria. Now, if we had a German ice wine, or even the Canadian, it would look like a pale white wine. But because this is made from Chardonnay and with Welsh Riesling, it's a little bit darker. So what aromas do you get from it? You really don't get any botrytic notes or botrytis notes because there is no botrytis in it. But with ice wine, you're going to get some clean, lemony character. And you're going to get some, maybe even some lime. Maybe some fresh citrus or honey or even passion fruit notes. With this, I get even a little bit of a baked apple kind of character. Now, in the old world, you're going to get a much stronger mineral tone. But they say that ice wine still smells of fresh snow. I've never gotten it, but you might. Now let's taste the wine. Wow, this is quite sweet. But again, because of that high level of acidity, it's not cloying, not like this brown sticky that we had in our last lecture. And these generally don't see any new oak for any of those vanilla characters. At the start of the lecture, I mentioned 3 methods of concentrating the sugar in grapes. Botrytis was the first method. Using frozen grapes was the second. The third method comes from drying the grapes. Drying grapes is a very old process that was used by the ancient Greeks. Records from the 8th century BC directs us to drying the grapes in the sun for 10 days and nights, and then in the shade for a further 5. If you cook, think of making a reduction sauce at home. You cook until almost all of the water evaporates, and as it does so, the flavors intensify. Likewise, drying the grapes concentrates the sugar inside the grape, as well as the acid and the flavors. In Italy, they call dried grape wine Vino Passito. These wines are made all over Italy, and here we have one from the southern region of Calabria. One of the most popular sweet dried grapes is Recioto della Valpolicella from Veneto, which we will discuss in later lectures, and Vin Santo from Tuscany. Vin Santo, or holy wine in Italian, is made from two white grapes, Trebbiano and Malvasia. If you're a cognac drinker, you will be interested to know that the grapes that make up cognac are called Uni Blanc, but these are the same grapes as Trebbiano and are planted all throughout southern Italy. The grapes are dried on mats and then crushed any time between November and March. If they're laid down for a long period, they're sweeter. If for less time, they're less sweet. They're then fermented and often placed in old oak barrels that are filled up to the top. As evaporation occurs throughout the porous oak, a gap forms between the wine and the top of the barrel. This causes further and more rapid oxidation during the 3 years of maturation that's legally required, but many winemakers don't release Vin Santo until 5 years. Now let's taste the Vin Santo. Notice it has a brownish, tawny color. This is because of the oxidation. Now, let's smell it. It almost smells like Amontillado. It's very, very nut-like, but it's not like a walnut or an almond. It's more like a Brazil nut. Something a little unwashed, with a little skin around it. It also smells of toffee and caramel. But this brown color and those notes will let you know that this is an oxidized wine, an intentionally oxidized wine. Now let's taste it. Vin Santo can be anything from dry, fairly dry, to very sweet. And so you see all different ranges. And you're not going to really be able to tell on the bottle which one's very sweet and which one's dry. This one happens to be on the drier side. But you'll also notice a little bit of volatile acidity in here. Sometimes, though, if the winemaking isn't really particularly careful, it can taste like nail polish remover, so that's not so good. But actually, this one's quite good. It just adds a little bit of lift. Now, when I was young, I worked in an Italian bakery. And in this Italian bakery, they had all different types of Italian pastries. And I always think of that whenever I taste Vin Santo, because it goes so well, this wine goes so well with Italian pastries and Italian type of desserts. The reason is because a lot of Italian desserts aren't very, very sweet. I mean, think of your biscotti or pasticciotto or sfogliatelle. I mean, they're not very, very sweet. And the mild nutty tones really complement those flavors. Like sparkling wines, sweet wines should be well chilled. But this doesn't mean at refrigerator temperature. They should be about 45 degrees Fahrenheit or 7 degrees Celsius. Well, your refrigerator can get up to 10 degrees colder than that, so it's not a good idea to keep it there for too long. I always think it's a good idea to keep a bottle of bubbly and a bottle of something sweet in the refrigerator, because it can be a real treat for you and your sweetie when guests come over and it's already there. Next, we start talking about regions, beginning with France. The wines of France are considered quality benchmarks for most wines around the world. So we're devoting 3 lectures to France, starting with Western France and the classic wines of Bordeaux and the Loire. You'll need the following wines for the next lecture. You'll need a Sauvignon Blanc-based Loire wine, which is either Sancerre, Pouilly-Fumé, or even a Quincy. A Chenin Blanc-based wine from the Loire Valley, such as Vouvray, Touraine, or Savinière. A Cabernet Franc-based Loire wine, either Chinon or Bourgogne. A white Bordeaux, preferably a Grave or a Pessac-Léognan. A red left bank Bordeaux, anything from Haute-Médoc, Pauillac, Saint-Estèphe, Saint-Julien, Margaux, or Grave. And a right bank red Bordeaux. Anything from Saint-Emilion, Pomerol, Blaye, or Bourg. Until then, stay sweet.